In Canadian federal politics, the Canucks are represented by two separate yet unequal groups: the globalists who sold out and the opposition trying to salvage a country. These are their stories. Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
I know this place is where I am.
Check this out. Where's Randy, guys? Look up. Is he up there? You up there blowing a squirrel, Randy? So, we're gonna take a stroll up. So, what do you think? Hey gang, Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. Hey gang, Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here, Canadian Looney. We have issues in Canada, right? Unless you're completely head in the sand, be aware of this. We've got a pretty great video here to show. Look how calm that is. So we're gonna walk out on the finger here. Hopefully it's not too slippery. But we do have some hope in this country. We've got so many great MPs from notably the Conservative Party. It is slippery.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was on political YouTube channel Northern Perspective discussing what he calls an RCMP cover-up of Justin Trudeau's scandals.
Many of the scandals of the Trudeau era should have been involved jail time. I mean, Trudeau broke the criminal code when he took a free vacation from someone with whom he had government business. It's just like it's right there in the criminal code. If the RCMP had been doing its job and not covering up for him, then he would have been criminally charged. And again, he probably violated the criminal code in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. These would normally have led to criminal charges, but of course the RCMP covered it all up.
Poilievre added that RCMP leadership is despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government. The RCMP commissioner pushed back on the claim, saying the matter was thoroughly reviewed under the previous government and found that no political interference was involved.
Mr. Barrett, go ahead.
Chair, I think it's important that we recognize that the standing orders of the House allow for chairs of committees to use their prerogative to call meetings when necessary and within the mandate of the committee. I think that as a opposition chaired committee, that it's incredibly important that this is an accountability committee, and so often we see that there are members who don't recognize the need for all members, all backbenchers, to hold the government to account. And that term, I mean members on all sides of the House need to make sure that the executive is kept in check. And so when the standing orders have been adopted by the House and allow for the chair of a committee to call a meeting, that the committee not act contrary to those standing orders of the House. It's a power that is used sparingly or rarely, but I think that it's important that it's one that's preserved. And when we look at the work that this committee has done and you look at the issues that have been in front of this committee, whether it's the $60 million Arrive scam and and a government that says there's nothing to see here, there's no this was necessary in the context of the pandemic, and therefore all expenses were justified, and everyone should move on. It's taken incredible lifts by committee and an awful lot of energy just to get committees to lift this off the ground. And once it's off the ground, we seem to find new information that is revealing to this government's lack of respect or fiduciary responsibility for Canadians. We have $60 million, and on an app that saw massive subcontracting. 30% of those subcontracted fees were for people who did no work on the app, and that is that's not acceptable, especially in the context of Canadians who are struggling to pay their bills and struggling to just get by. And this committee has been seized with on multiple occasions ethical scandals involving the Prime Minister. Again, important work done by this committee, whether it was the Trudeau Report 1, where the Prime Minister was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, and the not just in one instance, but multiple sections. I think 4 sections of the Act for illegal vacations taken to Billionaire Island, where he was joined by the then president of the Liberal Party, who's now a Liberal MP, was joined by the Labour Minister, and joined by Mr. Pitfield, the gentleman who he just relieved of a real estate burden at taxpayer expense. That came from the work of this committee, that we were able to expose and challenge the narrative that the government was putting forward. Again, with the Trudeau II report, much work was done at this committee, and the ability of the chair to call meetings outside of the regularly scheduled slots is sometimes necessary in order to fulfill our mandate. In that case, it was the Conflict of Interest Act again, and it was the Prime Minister who was found to have interfered in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, a firm that had illegally funded the Liberal Party of Canada, but also was found guilty of bribing Libyan officials in the Gaddafi regime to the tune of $48 million, defrauding the Libyan people of more than $100 million. And we saw related, of course, to the Prime Minister, but the Trudeau III report, where another member of the Prime Minister's cabinet, in that case, his then Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act. These are part of these issues are part of the work of this committee, and the $1 billion Green Slush Fund, because we're not duplicating the work of other committees, it's being addressed at the Industry Committee, but has also seen hearings here and government operations, I think public accounts. But this was important for this committee to introduce, examine, and then for the committee to get ultimately got housed elsewhere. But when important issues come forward, the committee needs to be able to do its work. And that's what the standing orders allow for. It's not infrequent that we find ourselves dealing with issues that touch on members of the executive and their obligations having been breached, and what that looks like in terms of the erosion of Canadians' confidence in our public institutions. The president of the King's Privy Council was found, Minister LeBlanc, was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act and claim scam. It was lucrative contracts that went to a family member of the minister's spouse. Again, work that's not part of the scheduled work plan, but needs to be part of the consideration for when the chair exercises his role in calling meetings. But Minister LeBlanc was found guilty of breaking the act in that case, not part of our regular work plan. I mentioned previously former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau, sometimes referred to as Bill No More, having broken the Conflict of Interest Code and the Conflict of Interest Act. And the code violation was, of course, the forgotten French villa. Who among us hasn't forgotten to declare their French villa? And with respect to the scandal, the WE scandal involving the $1 billion Canada Student Service grant going to Justin Trudeau's buddies, the Kielburgers, Bill Morneau was found guilty of breaking the act 3 times for his private interests and failing to recuse himself from decisions relating to the WE organization. And I should circle back to Minister LeBlanc, because we hear from, as part of the mandate of this committee, the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. Now, when the Commissioner Dion resigned and his role wasn't filled, the government, of course, appointed an interim commissioner. And that interim commissioner was the sister-in-law of the minister, and Minister LeBlanc. That's part of our role, is to hold the government accountable, because the appearance of a conflict can be as damaging as a real conflict. And for the appointee and the minister to say, oh well, we weren't involved in the decision, but what does it look like to the public? And that's what we talk about here, and that's what we examine here at this committee. Of course, when we have the regular work plan for the committee, the regular sitting calendar for the committee. Sometimes we're able to insert items into that. Sometimes we have meetings that are called pursuant to Standing Order 1064, where we can deal with an issue. But we also had the issue of Trade Minister, Liberal Trade Minister Mary Ng, who was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, Sections 6, Section 21, and this was when she gave her best friend, Amanda Alvaro, contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars, not tendered, but just she had a comfortable relationship with a Liberal insider, a former Liberal staffer, and thought, you know what, this is the right fit for me. She was unconcerned about the not just the appearance, but also the the reality of that for taxpayers. Would she have spent tens of thousands of dollars on that service if it wasn't to her friend? Would Canadians have been on the hook for that expense when she already had ministry staff and member staff to fulfill, that function? We had, and it's interesting now because the Speaker is an elected Liberal member, but he was then the parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister and parliamentary secretary to President of the Treasury Board, and he was found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, using his position to try and influence the CRTC, and to the benefit of a personal interest of his. This is something that is important. I mean, the now Speaker, the then Liberal Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Fergus, was a member of this committee. But once you have that role, once you swear that oath, it's the responsibility of all parliamentarians to make sure that that accountability function is being exercised, because it's what Canadians expect. And the standing orders allow for chairs, not just of opposition-chaired committees, but of government-chaired committees as well, to do certain things, to bring a meeting, to schedule a meeting, to call the meeting to order, to suspend the meeting, to adjourn the meeting, and to respond to those 106.4, Standing Order 106.4 meeting requests. And we see government chairs and opposition chairs have employed all of those powers to call meetings outside of the regular time. We know that there have been instances where it's been essential that this committee step up and respond to something that's in the public interest at that time, and to examine the issue. And sometimes where there's smoke, the fire's gone out, but sometimes we find out that where there's smoke, there's actually an inferno. And that is very often the case. And I would be uncomfortable to abdicate my responsibility as an opposition member to not have the tools in the toolbox available, and for the chair to call a meeting, and for me not to be there or have someone there in my place. I don't want to presuppose what the next 90 days are going to bring, because I don't know. And every time I think that there's going to be nothing that touches the mandate of this committee during a recess period, we find we find ourselves unpleasantly disappointed to see that we have to come back and deal with an issue that has cropped up with, and the appearance of a conflict can even rise to that test. We saw an example of that. We saw an example of that over January, where the Prime Minister ended up taking another one of his vacations at a luxury resort, and did so. Yes, there was great expense to taxpayers for the Prime Minister's security, but it was also a gift, and the stay at this luxury resort. But what does that look like to Canadians when someone who's involved in the Trudeau Foundation, which of course is an issue that we've examined at this committee, and the Trudeau Foundation's many ties to the government. This is a Trudeau Foundation booster or member who's giving the Prime Minister a substantial gift.
Thank you very much, Kurt Maria. Good to see you. Thank you all for joining in. Like, this is going to be very interesting.
Booster or member who's giving the Prime Minister a substantial gift. We need to be able to exercise our mandate, and so I'm not comfortable with the limiting of. I'm not comfortable with the limiting of powers that are afforded under the standing orders. I'm not actually sure that that by motion at committee that we can do that. I would be interested to hear from someone from the law clerk's office if there is any precedence for committees limiting powers that are given under the standing orders. We can pass whatever motions that we want, but what is the effect? What is the force of that motion? So I'm not comfortable with this, and I'm curious if there's any nuance that's available, because we've just had a case that demonstrates why it may be necessary to have meetings, and that's the hearings with Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson with respect to Liberal Minister Randy Boissonneau's involvement with those two companies and the questions that have come up about that. And that's pushed our agenda now into July. And so it's important that we keep all of the tools that are available to us in the toolbox. I think it's an open question whether or not this is a power that the committee has to limit powers that are given under the standing orders. So I'll take a look at the motion. Listen to what the other members have to say, if anyone else has anything to say about it, and but just at first blush, I'm just based on the important work that we have done, the work that we can do. I don't think that I'm comfortable supporting this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I have a list. The list includes Mr. Brock, next Cooper, Ms. Damoff, Mr. Green, suivi par Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Brock, you have the floor on the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Barrett, for his thorough review and rationale as to why he personally has concerns with limiting the ability of this committee to do its important work. And at first blush, I really don't need time to review the content of my colleague Mr. Green's motion, because I'm certainly not in favor of that. We have to take a step back from time to time and remind ourselves why we're here. And we're here because Canadians in our constituencies voted to put us here, to be their voice, to do the necessary work, not only within our communities, but also here in the nation's capital. And we're all privileged to be on this particular committee, one of the most important committees that government operations have, because we are in the position to study the actions of others and to determine whether or not laws have been broken. And Canadians expect us to do the work year-round. They certainly understand the necessity of having personal time with our families. And when you take a look at the actual parliamentary calendar, we have an abundant amount of time to spend not only with our families, but with our constituents. In fact, it's a running sort of point of contention between myself and my spouse, who quite often is supportive of the work that I do here on the Hill, but misses the old Larry Brock, where although he could be busy throughout the day in courts, you miss him too? Thank you. She and my children had comfort in knowing that I would return to the house in the evening and wake up in the house in the morning. It is a difficult task being a parliamentarian, and we probably all have similar stories with our respective families. It's an ebb and it's a flow, and there are good times and there are bad times, but ultimately the job entails us to be away at significant points of time. But when you look at the entire calendar, and this is how I justify it to my spouse, quite often goes in one ear and out the other, but I think she listens to it and understands the rationale. I'm actually working here in Ottawa less than I was actually inside a courtroom. We have a very generous summer break. We have an extremely generous Christmas break. We are off at Thanksgiving. We are off at March break, often 2 weeks at a time. We are off during the May holidays. So when you take a look at the actual amount of time we are here doing the work of parliamentarians, it really begs the question that the Canadians don't have that same sort of privileges that we have. They're working largely through the entire year, and depending on the nature of their employment, they might be able to secure 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks of summer holidays throughout the entire year, the usual statutory holidays throughout the year. Parliamentarians are different. So when I take a look at the nature of this motion, what message am I communicating with my constituents that my 2.5 months of summer vacation is more important to me and to my family than doing the work of parliamentarians here in Ottawa, particularly when we've got dark clouds of unethical, scandalous, and corrupt behavior by this government. There was a point in time in the last 6 or 7 months where I often remarked, pretty much every other week or so, another scandal erupts from this government. But lately, it's almost on a daily basis. There are nuances that are coming out of scandals that we have been studying in numerous committees. And I just read a recent report in one of the nationals that made the conclusion, or drew the conclusion that I totally agree with, that unfortunately this is just the tip of the iceberg at the level of this corruption in the Justin Trudeau government. So I can well imagine, without even taking a straw poll of constituents in my riding, if I said my 2.5 months trumps the purpose by which you sent me to Ottawa, they would be appalled at that. And I think as adults and as parliamentarians, we can talk and walk, we can chew and walk, chew gum and walk at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. We can spend the quality time that we need with our families. We can spend the quality time that we need in our constituencies, but we can come back from time to time to do the important work of this committee to get to the bottom of these scandals. I'm not saying that we're going to complete this, Mr. Chair, by the end of the summer, but by completely shutting off our ability to conduct work unless it's an emergency under 106.4, I think misses the point. And as I've indicated, I have been party to a number of committees where I have been parachuted in to examine the multitude of scandals. And let's face it, even on the SNC Lavalin scandal, okay, we haven't even got to the bottom of that yet. We had the RCMP commissioner, and I can't remember the actual date, but I believe it was this committee, before I was a permanent member of this committee. We invited the RCMP commissioner to attend, and it didn't meet the agenda of the Liberal Party of Canada. It didn't meet the agenda of the members opposite to me. And I seem to recall that it may have been even on a break week, because this committee has sat on a number of occasions during break weeks. And I remember the RCMP commissioner, before he even had a chance to give his opening statement, a motion to adjourn was brought by a Liberal member, and it was granted. Because it didn't fit with their narrative. And their narrative has been, literally since Justin Trudeau took government, is there's nothing to see here. Absolutely nothing to see here. We've made mistakes. We've offered partial apologies. But trust us when we say there's nothing to see here. I can't accept that. And I know my colleagues on this side of the room can't accept that either. On the SNC matter, lingering questions. And I know that I'm going to have the ability, hopefully, at some point today, depending on the length of time by which we are voting this afternoon, to try to try to close the circle and deal with the hanging threads with the RCMP commissioner, who's coming to public accounts for 2 hours. And I know he had testified here earlier, but there were a number of outstanding questions that were not answered satisfactorily. For instance, why did it take literally 5 years for the RCMP to conclude that there was no probable case to charge Justin Trudeau with obstruction of justice? And the convoluted way that they tried to demonstrate the inability to close out their investigation from a former prosecutor's perspective, it was challenging to truly appreciate what they were saying. There was a changing narrative with respect to their onus. They were conflating their onus with the Crown onus in terms of producing evidence to convince a trier of fact of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That has been and never will be the prerogative of police agencies. Their sole mandate, which is an extremely low standard, is there reasonable and probable grounds? For instance, is there reasonable and probable grounds to believe Justin Trudeau should be charged with the criminal offense of obstruction of justice? There are two facets to the prosecution of obstruction of justice. One is, what is the actus reus? What is the actus reus? What did he do to obstruct justice? And I think the evidence is abundantly clear. It's unchallenged. It's confirmed in the report by former Commissioner Dion that he had a political agenda. And he knew that there was a tool available to his then first Indigenous female Attorney General, Minister of Justice, to intervene in the decision made by the Director of Public Prosecutions not to offer SNC-Lavalin, who is facing corruption and bribery charges, very serious charges in this country for which, upon conviction, could have landed executives serving a prison sentence. He wanted Jody Wilson-Raybould to deviate from her prosecutorial independence and intervene in that decision to offer the deferred prosecution agreement. This was in September of 2017. And for those who remember, and I know that my colleague, Mr. Cooper, actually had the privilege of questioning Jody Wilson-Raybould at committee, and that was followed up with her writing a book. I have read that cover to cover, and it's appalling at the lengths by which our Prime Minister crossed the line between interference, obstruction, and allowing her to exercise her independence. She made it abundantly clear to him during that first meeting. That first meeting in September, for those who have read the book, and she may have highlighted this in her testimony, was to discuss a number of other issues, particularly her priorities as it relates to Indigenous matters. Justin Trudeau came into that meeting red hot. He had no intention of discussing any other issue, particularly Indigenous issues, other than SNC-Lavalin. He reminded her of a couple of things. He reminded her of a pending provincial election in Quebec that he felt would be very problematic if this multinational corporation was still subject to criminal prosecution in Canada. And more importantly, and damning, I would suggest, he reminded Jody Wilson-Raybould that he was the member for Papineau, the riding by which SNC had its headquarters. And when Jody said, "Are you asking me to make a decision contrary to a decision I already made? Are you interfering in my decision?" For any impartial observer of what took place during that discussion, the proverbial fly in the wall, you would conclude absolutely the Prime Minister of a G7 nation preferred the interests of a corrupt corporation and wanted his Attorney General, who wore two hats, which begs the question about the utility of a two-hat minister moving forward. He wanted her to make that decision in his favor and in the favor of SNC. He backed off, of course, and said, "Oh, no, of course, that decision is yours." But the damage was done. That was the actus reus. That was the act by which he, then followed by PMO staff, then followed by ministerial staff in other departments, ultimately concluding with former Privy Council clerk Michael Warnock, unknown to him, being audio taped in that fateful telephone discussion, meeting, I should say, in December of 2017. Commissioner Dion clearly articulates and outlines all of the attempts to interfere in her decision-making. Jody Wilson-Raybould truly demonstrated the integrity that you'd expect from an attorney general who probably felt immense pressure as a member of the Justin Trudeau cabinet. She was mindful of her dual role, and she held firm. Michael Wernick came into that meeting, again, red hot. The purpose, according to Jody Wilson-Raybould, was to discuss, again, other issues. Those other issues were never discussed. Michael Wernick came in hot and made it known to Jody Wilson-Raybould on more than one occasion that the Prime Minister was adamant about this. Now, why is that term adamant important? For the lawyers in this committee, you'll remark, for those who practice criminal law, about the second aspect of prosecutions. We talked about the actus reus. Now we have the mens rea, and that is the intent. And the obstruction of justice is a specific intent offense. So when Michael Wernick comes in to this meeting red hot and references the Prime Minister on more than one occasion being adamant that he is going to find a solution one way or another, is indicative of intent. That is the only plausible legal definition of what the Prime Minister had instructed Michael Wernick to do. Now, Michael Wernick testified and would have everyone believe, as nonsensical as this is, that he took it upon his own self to initiate the meeting. And he was not directed by the Prime Minister in any which way or form to again put that final element of pressure on her, which is just preposterous. No one believes that. He lied. So when I take a look from a former prosecutor's perspective, the charge of obstruction of justice, I'm mindful of the case law that exists in this particular area, and I can't remember the name of the case, but it came out of the Supreme Court of Canada, which set out the essential elements to the offense of obstruction, and it made it abundantly clear that success to the obstruction is not necessary. An attempt is all that is necessary. And that's exactly what we had in this particular case. Jody Wilson-Raybould held her own, maintained her position, never deviated from that position. Next thing you know, she's facing a cabinet shuffle. Again, a preposterous explanation offered by the Prime Minister and his government that it was because of the sudden resignation of Treasury Board President Scott Bryson. Was she the only high-profile minister that could have filled that role? I don't think so. No one believes that for a minute. She was demoted because she had the audacity to say no to Justin Trudeau. Take a look in history to all the MPs who've said no to Justin Trudeau, who proclaims that he is a feminist prime minister. Another blatant lie. Let's take a look at MP, I'm going to probably mispronounce her name. Is it Selena Chavez?
Selena Caesar Chavez.
Chavez, okay? Had great difficulty with the Prime Minister during her entire tenure. ultimately felt that he was pressuring her in ways that she was completely uncomfortable with. Again, this feminist prime minister showed her the door, just like he ultimately showed our first Indigenous Attorney General. Had no difficulty as well with the excellent work that was done by Cabinet Minister Jane Philpott. I believe she was Minister of Health at the time. Her mistake, what was her crime? Her crime was supporting Jody Wilson-Raybould. Supporting her and suggesting that no, the Prime Minister was completely out of line. Absolutely out of line. She was shown the door. And then I remember, I wasn't a parliamentarian back then, but I remember how gleefully the Liberal government and its backbenchers were just gleefully clapping on television in front of all of Canada. Okay, and Mr. Baines is smiling as well, but he wasn't there. But maybe had he been there, he might have been smiling and clapping as well. But I said to myself, what are you so damn happy about? What are you smiling about, Justin Trudeau? You're Canada's first feminist prime minister. And here you are clapping like a seal to celebrate the demise of a very strong, two strong cabinet ministers who had the strength to say no to Justin Trudeau. That's what happens. That's what happens to Liberal MPs who have the audacity to challenge the almighty wisdom of Justin Trudeau. So you're right. I'm absolutely right to have these questions still percolating in my mind why the RCMP did not complete the task when the evidence was right there. I'm also mindful of the fact that Michael Wernick had shared with us not too long ago that this particular issue was never discussed at Cabinet. Wonder if people remember around this table that actual piece of evidence. It was never discussed at Cabinet, yet we heard from the RCMP Commissioner that his request for documents were blocked by Justin Trudeau and the government because of Cabinet confidences. Well, if there were no discussions at Cabinet, then there were no confidences. So that's another issue I need to raise with Commissioner Duhem this afternoon, because I didn't have that information available to me when he first attended. Why was it important for Commissioner Dion to interview 14 people? Literally anyone who had something to say about the SNC Lavalin matter. But the RCMP, in their infinite wisdom, decided to limit that to 4 individuals. Can you say that that was a thorough investigation? I think not. And again, when I posed that question to them and their nonsensical response to it certainly didn't satisfy myself, and I'm sure didn't satisfy Canadians. And for those at this table who remember my final question to the Commissioner at that time, is I phrased it in such a way that you'll forgive me, Commissioner, when I say to you that your handling of this investigation can only lead to the inevitable conclusion that there exists a 2-tier level of justice in this country, particularly as it relates to Justin Trudeau. He, his deputy, and other members have responded to committees that no one is above the law, and that no one includes Justin Trudeau. And although no sitting Prime Minister has ever been charged with a criminal offense, the RCMP has left the door slightly ajar. And I don't have the actual verbiage, the words in front of me, but the report that I had access to when I questioned our current Attorney General at Committee of the Whole concluded that the RCMP would continue the investigation if they had access to further documents. I'm going to explore with the Commissioner what that means when he attends. We've already satisfied the issue regarding cabinet confidences that obviously was not discussed. And what does it say to Canadians? What does it say to Canadians under investigation? Can they simply refuse to cooperate with law enforcement? Would they have the same ability to shut down an investigation like Justin Trudeau did by simply refusing to hand over documents? I think Justin Trudeau is the only Canadian in this country that has that ability. And apparently that's okay with the RCMP. I can tell you emphatically, Mr. Chair, that it's not okay to Canadians. Absolutely not. As I've indicated at the outset, the obstruction of justice charge is not a difficult prosecution. And I put this to the Commissioner that I've dealt with cases where the police have investigated a historical homicide, have put together thousands of pages of disclosure, a trial that literally took maybe a couple of years to start, a trial that may have lasted 30 or 45 days. I have personally completed far more serious prosecutions than an obstruction of justice charge. So it really begs the question, why did they delay for the years that they did, other than they had no political will to charge as sitting Prime Minister? Are they truly independent? Well, the RCMP Act may differ on that issue. Section 4 of the RCMP Act makes it abundantly clear that they report to the Minister of Public Safety. And it's the government that actually appoints the Commissioner. Begs the question, how independent can you be under those circumstances? These are the questions I get from Canadians from across this country. These are the questions I get from my constituents. Now, I look at the time. I have many more thoughts in my mind on a multitude of other scandals, but I'm going to cede my time now to my colleague, Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brock. Continuing with the list on the motion, I have Mr. Cooper, Ms. Damoff, Mr. Green, Mr. Villemure, and then Mr. Couric has indicated he wants to speak. Mr. Cooper, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would make a few observations with respect to this motion that has been put forward by Mr. Green. First of all, this motion is not unique to this committee. This is part of a coordinated campaign between the Liberal government and their NDP coalition partner, in which, once again, the NDP is doing the bidding of the Liberals. We have a Prime Minister and a government that are in chaos. A government that is 20 points behind in the polls, a Prime Minister who is literally despised by Canadians, a government that has managed to screw up just about everything that they have touched over the past 9 years, from record deficits and debt that has led to 40-year high inflation, to high interest rates that have all created a cost of living crisis to which these Liberals' response to the cost of living crisis that they created is to make life even less affordable for Canadians with carbon tax hikes and now this latest tax hike on healthcare workers, specifically doctors, farmers, small businesses, and homeowners that they, home builders that they claim is a tax hike on the so-called super rich when in fact everyday Canadians are going to pay and pay dearly as a result. And on top of that, we have a government that is mired in scandal. In fact, it is arguable that this is the most corrupt government in modern Canadian history. And I saw one Liberal member thought that, thinks it's funny, but we have Dominic LeBlanc found guilty of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. He's a senior minister in this government. We have Mary Ng, who's found guilty of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. She's a senior minister in this government. We have Bill Morneau, who's found guilty of breaching multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. He was the finance minister in this government. We have a former member of this committee, if you can believe it, who was found guilty, a Liberal member, who was found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And then we have the Prime Minister himself, the first Prime Minister in Canadian history to be found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And he was found guilty not once, but twice. And now we have the Minister from Edmonton, Mr. Boissonnault, who has so much to answer for, and I'm going to get into that momentarily. But we have a government that has a history of entitlement, patronage, and straight-up corruption. There is a culture of corruption embedded within this government. That's just established based upon the 9-year history of these Liberals. So in the face of all of these failings and all of the scandals and how frustrated and angry Canadians are at these Liberals, it's no wonder that they want to get out of town. They want to hide over the summer. They want to shut down the ability of parliamentary committees to provide appropriate oversight. And I'm not going to be a party to doing any of the bidding for these Liberals. There is a reason why we have 3 oversight committees that are chaired by the official opposition, Government Operations Committee, Public Accounts, and the Ethics Committee. And boy, all of these committees are working overtime in the face of all of the mismanagement and all of these Liberal scandals. And to say, well, simply bring forward a 1064, I say not good enough. Not good enough, because we've seen the NDP work with the Liberals to adjourn meetings, to prevent 1064 motions from being debated and voted on. So what is the rationale for this motion? The only rationale that I can see is that it's about doing the bidding for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. There is a reason why, in the standing orders, the chair has the discretion to convene a meeting. I say leave it to the chair of this committee, a very good chair. And we have, and I do want to zero in on the matter that we were discussing earlier today, and that is the cloud of scandal that hangs over the Minister of Employment, Mr. Boissonnault. yes, we are going to hopefully hear from his former business partners, Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson, but I would submit that we can't wait until the fall before there's any further scrutiny undertaken by this committee of Mr. Boissonnault and the series of questionable activities that he has been connected with in relation to both Ms. Poon and Mr. Anderson. Let's look at what we're dealing with Mr. Boissonnault. We have a minister who had started up a company, a lobbying firm, after he lost a seat in the 2019 election. He got around, there was a loophole that allowed him to set up a company even though he couldn't lobby, and he hired Ms. Poon, who lobbied for his company. When he was returned to the House of Commons in 2021, he appropriately wound down that company. Ms. Poon took over, but Ms. Poon then set up her own lobbying firm that was lobbying this government, that was lobbying Minister Boissonnault's own department, and that had received $110 million in government contracts as Ms. Poon's company was paying Mr. Boissonnault. Mr. Boissonnault was not transparent. In fact, he attempted to hide his connection to Ms. Poon's lobbying firm by in the declaration that he made to the Ethics Commissioner, in which he hid behind the numbered company, not the name that the company or the lobbying firm, the company held itself out as. As a result, the Ethics Commissioner was unaware that the firm that was paying Mr. Boissonnault was lobbying his department and other departments within this government in securing contracts. Mr. Boissonnault said, well, there's nothing to see here because the payments that he was receiving from Ms. Poon's lobbying company were in relation to accounts receivable from work that he did prior to his election, except for the fact that he never did any work for Ms. Poon's company. So why is he being paid by Ms. Poon's company, a company he did no work for, a company that was lobbying his department, that was that was benefiting handsomely in securing $110 million in contracts? Mr. Boissonnault has provided no explanation for why he was being paid by Ms. Poon's company. It doesn't add up. We need to probe that. We also need to understand why it is that Mr. Boissonnault hid behind a numbered company. Why was he not transparent? Was it just a sloppiness on his part? Now, he says that he was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. He hasn't been cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. And when he was asked about whether he's been cleared by the lobbying commissioner. As far as I understand, it's on the lobbying commissioner's radar, this issue. So there are many questions to be asked of Mr. Boissonnault in regards to what is, at the very least, a very questionable arrangement of having one's business partner lobby the department of the minister who's connected to that individual who's being paid by that company as that company is securing money from the federal government for clients. But then there is the issue around Global Health Imports Corporation and the question of where's Randy? Who is Randy? This is a company that Mr. Boissonnault set up just at the beginning of the pandemic. He had no experience in the PPE business, neither did Mr. Anderson, whose career was that of a hockey coach. But amazingly, they set up this company right at the time of the pandemic and began to secure millions of dollars in government contracts for PPE. Raises some questions about how they managed to pull that off. Experts and those familiar with the industry said that it's almost impossible for essentially a two-person company with no track record, no experience, to suddenly start up a company and secure millions of dollars in this area. But I digress. Needless to say, all has not gone well at Global Health Imports Corporation. Mr. Boissonnault held himself out, as he confirmed when he appeared before this committee, as a business, as a partner at Global Health Imports with Mr. Anderson. Global Health Imports did not appear, well, I shouldn't say didn't appear because there are judgments to back it up, did not operate as, as a good business, an ethical business. This is a company that has been hit with $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts for ripping off clients. $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts in respect of a company that Mr. Boissonnault started, held himself out as a partner at, and continues to have a 50% ownership in. Now, what does that say? Before getting into what the bigger issue is involving Mr. Boissonnault, just on that basis, what does that say about the standard of ethics within this Liberal government? That Justin Trudeau has appointed a minister who was involved in a shady PPE company that, under questionable circumstances, secured government contracts that ripped off clients, that has essentially been found guilty by Alberta courts in the way of $7.8 million in judgments that have been awarded to those clients who were ripped off by Mr. Boissonnault's company, a company that he was engaged in and a partner in during some of the instances that led to, or business dealings that led to the lawsuits that resulted in the $7.8 million in judgments. The fact that there is a minister in this government that was involved in those kinds of shady business dealings, who has a 50% interest in a company that is on the hook in judgments in the amount of $7.8 million, I would think would be enough to say, Mr. Boissonneau, you're done. You're fired. You don't meet the standard, the ethical standard of serving in the federal cabinet. But again, Mr. Boissonneau is not an outlier in this government when it comes to ethical misconduct. As I said, Dominic LeBlanc, guilty. Mary Ng, guilty. Bill Morneau, guilty. Greg Fergus, guilty. Justin Trudeau, guilty twice. So Randy Boissonneau, it sort of fits into the culture of corruption that I alluded to, that is so embedded in a government that is frankly rotten to the core. It's rotten to the core. But then, Mr. Boissonneau says, there's, he said, when the $7.8 million in judgments came to light, he said, those lawsuits arose after I left. Well, it turns out that's not true. He lied. Straight up lied. Again, that's par for the course with these Liberals. That's the ethical standard of these Liberals. And then, the very day that Boissonneau was set to appear at this committee, where he was going to peddle the falsehood that he had been cleared by the ethics commissioner, Global News broke a story in which there were text messages from his then business partner at Global Health Imports, Anderson, of texts from Randy. Now, the text from Randy amounts to basically a shakedown of a client from California who is suing, another one of the many companies and those who've had the misfortune of doing business with Global Health Imports, who have commenced a lawsuit for fraud against Global Health Imports. Global Health Imports, the context of his text message is that you have Randy Boissonneau writing to Anderson saying that the California-based client, the Gowie Group, better wire over what is equivalent to a $500,000 Canadian deposit for the purchase of PPE. According to the Gowie Group, and there are records of it, they transferred the $500,000 to Mr. Boissonneau and Mr. Anderson's company, and then the PPE never arrived. Global Health Imports just didn't deliver it. And then mysteriously, some might say not so mysteriously, the warehouse of Global Health Imports was burnt to the ground weeks after the $500,000 was wired over to Global Health Imports company. Burned to the ground. The Edmonton police have concluded that it was likely arson. One might wonder who was responsible for that arson. Global News reported that Anderson spoke about paying vendors after his company received insurance money. Just another coincidence. But so you have a minister that is involved in this very sketchy company, but what is really problematic, of course, about this text from Randy is that if it in fact is Mr. Boissonnault, and there's every reason to believe it is, it means that the minister was engaged in, participated in, a $500,000 fraud. But not only that, Mr. Boissonnault was a minister of the Crown on the date of the text messages and when this fraudulent transaction occurred that Global Health Imports orchestrated and Anderson orchestrated. Now, what is at issue there? Well, very simply, it is a blatant violation of the Conflict of Interest Act for a minister to be involved in the operations of a business, of any business. Mr. Boissonnault can retain ownership, but he cannot be involved in the operation of.
There are very many levels to corruption in our country. Like I'm sorry, we're skipping off of that one, which is a great panel right there. We had Larry Brock, Michael Barrett, Michael Cooper, like three of our favorites. But we're going to skip into this. Let's get this going. Because, like, our little beautiful island, Prince Edward Island, I don't know if you've ever been there. It's amazing. It really is. But
politicians need to do something. I think there's a major lacuna in the cooperation between the federal.
Today will reveal illicit networks, money laundering, and abuse of public office, and will examine the reforms and actions necessary and needed to confront these risks. We're joined today by experts who will share with us their experiences uncovering Chinese and Chinese-backed activities undermining Canadian democracy in one of the nation's most idyllic settings. Some of you will be shocked by the gall of those perpetrating the actions, the incompetence of a system that failed to notice or react, and the incredible lack of action to this day. The danger of these illicit activities extend beyond the individual harms or the transgressions of single individuals. This is organized activity that threatens Canada's democracy. Canadians can no longer overlook the dangers and must insist on action by law enforcement, security officials, and perhaps more importantly, national leaders who will provide the policy frameworks that will either enable or confront these menaces. Today's discussion is conducted openly, not surprisingly, as the events are reflected in the new book written and produced by some of our panelists. The moderator for today's discussion is Mr. Kevin Wong. Kevin served as a Member of Parliament starting in 2021 in Canada's 44th Parliament. Elected as an independent at the age of 32, he was the youngest MP of Asian heritage to serve in Parliament and the first independent nominated by his peers to key positions with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Kevin has numerous awards and accolades for his service to the nation and his abilities as one of Canada's amazing young leaders. And he's a senior fellow here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Directly pertinent to today's discussion, Kevin has been the target of foreign interference and is an outspoken advocate for tougher action and transparency. Please join me in welcoming Kevin and the other participants.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I think, as always, when it comes to MLI, we have an incredible room of people from the diplomatic community, people from the public service, experts in many different fields. And we're here today for a very important discussion with three people who really know what they're talking about. starting from my left, we have the Honorable Wayne Easter. Wayne has spent most of his life in public office. And I think what's particularly relevant here is he remains a proud Islander who calls the island home. And he was Canada's 40th Solicitor General, which today in Cabinet is known as the Minister of Public Safety. So he knows a thing or two about public safety. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of his bio because, one, it will take up too much time. That's not what we're here for, and you can always look that up. To Wayne's left is Dean Baxendale. He is an international columnist. He is the president of Optimum Publishing International and also the China Democracy Fund. He is someone who you will have seen at multiple fora around the world engaging on these issues. If there is a marginalized community whose voice needs to be heard, he is there working with them to elevate. To his left is Gary Clement, former RCMP superintendent and also national director for RCMP's Proceeds of Crime program. Today he is chief of anti-money laundering for VersaBank. He knows a thing or two about how the bad guys use money in bad ways. So today will be really largely broken out into two sections. The first is looking at what are our national security challenges. We'll be starting that conversation with Gary and Dean. And the second half is going to be looking at the solutions that we'll unpack with Wayne. We'll start off each section with opening remarks from each of the panelists. They have up to 10 minutes, you don't have to use the full 10 minutes. And following that, that's gonna lay the groundwork for us to have a discussion. We have a few kind of questions for me to kick it off, but really what I wanna get to is to open the floor to you and get your questions, because I think that's gonna be really what is going to take out all of the key insights that we want. And so without further ado, Gary, you're gonna kick it off, whether you wanna sit there or be at the podium. You have up to 10 minutes for your introductory remarks.
Geez, I thought I had 30, okay. First of all, thanks everybody for coming. I think this is a real important discussion. And I want to sort of start off by sort of what framed it for me over the last 50 years. I started when I was 4. So, 1976, I read a great book. Actually, Dean's dad published it. It was called The Canadian Connection by Joseph Charbonneau. And when I read that book, this was following a very lengthy undercover operation I'd been involved in. And the one line that stuck out to me was one of the underlying reasons for flourishing criminality, we must admit, is a lack of knowledge and interest on the part of the general public. And I'd really like to say over the last 50 years that's changed. It has not. It has not, and the public has allowed this to expand. For me, I had the opportunity, was very fortunate to meet a gentleman named Judge Giovanni Falcone out of Italy. He was appointed, he was taking on organized crime in Italy. This was early 80s. I had a chance to sit down with him as a young officer. And one of the things he said to me is the fight against organized crime is not just a battle, it's a duty. Judge Falcone was killed 18 months after I had that discussion with him. He was slaughtered by transnational organized crime. That's what we're confronted with. And in this country, if we could ever get, and not all, but a lot of our politicians need to pull their head out of the sand. This has been going on for far too long in this country. We look at everything that's going on today, and it's really a sad commentary. As much as most of us probably shake our head when Donald Trump gets out of bed in the morning, some of what he's saying is our own fault. And he's right. We have brought this on ourselves. In Canada today, our law enforcement agencies abroad in the United States and elsewhere of Five Eyes don't want to work with us. That's fact. Now that's an absolute damn shame, because I can tell you when I worked, I did a number of investigations working hand in hand with the United States, crossing the border with them, working with them. Today, because of Stinchcombe and Jordan and things like that, that is not a possibility, because we have to disclose everything in our courts in Canada. We have to have it ready in 18 months to get to trial. Well, unfortunately, a lot of investigation in the United States, they're pulling intelligence out of a major investigation they got ongoing, and they can't allow that full disclosure. So it becomes injurious to international relations, and we end up having to discard that investigative capacity. That is why we're sitting here today. We have watched the PRC, United Front, take hold in this country. They have elite captured. British Columbia is ground zero, Vancouver. When I was overseas between 91 and 94, I wrote a paper that Vancouver will displace Hong Kong as the transshipment center for drugs elsewhere in the world. That's happening today. We have sold off some of our ports. We don't have port police. We have sold off some of our, so we've got freedom of ports. We are selling off a lot of our history, and I'll talk about Anna Green Gables in a minute, but let's take a look at the Bay. That's the most recent, came out. There's a lady out of China, openly admitted on a recent interview that she's aligned to the PRC government, and she's buying up the Bay the Bay and taking over the leases. That is Canada's heritage, and we're giving it to China. Now, Anna Green Gables, which brings us here today and the reason we wrote the book. If I were to ask you about PEI, most of you in this room will tell me about Anna Green Gables. We've all read it. We all saw it as kids. Do you know that that was translated into China, taken over to China, and became part of the marketing program for the provincial nominee program to attract Chinese immigrants into Prince Edward Island under the provincial nominee program, of which 85% never stayed in the province. They paid their money and never stayed in the province. Because what you have to understand is China has a $50,000 limit to get their money out, and yet we're selling acreages in Saskatchewan, waterfront in Cobourg, and you know, it's amazing. It's always this nondescript, filthy rich lady that's doing all the buying. Well, in Prince Edward Island, they took it a step further. There's a Buddhist monastery down there, and I'm not saying that all the monks that are there are aware of what's going on here, because I don't believe that. They're there for monastic reasons. But that monastery is not a monastic monastery. It is a money laundering front in massive proportions. We interviewed tellers that said they had hundreds of thousands of brand new $100 bills sequentially numbered in the night deposit box put in on a weekend. And that the manager said, oh, it's just religion. I know we interviewed people in real estate that a house was worth, we got this from the horse's mouth, their house was valued at $185,000. Well, they got the $185,000 plus a bag of cash for $140,000. And I'm sure the Honorable Mr. Easter has heard those stories too. That's what we're confronted with. And then you ask, well, why? You've heard of the Vancouver model in money laundering, and I've been doing money laundering for almost 50 years. I've given expert evidence in a lot of cases. The monastery has set up corporations that are transnational organized crime in nature in the way they're established. They are moving money, and I can't say 100%, but it has the hallmarks of what we saw in British Columbia and could very well be fentanyl money laundering. That's what we're dealing with. And this country has not woken up to the fact that that exists today. Our politicians have not woken up to the fact that that exists today. And I guess I'll conclude this opening start by a quote I love from Robert Kennedy. Every generation inherits a world it never made, and it does so if it automatically becomes the trustee of that world for those that come after. In due course, each generation makes its own accounting to its children. I have to say right now, I would be embarrassed to think what my great-grandchildren are going to think of how we've managed this country, because it's an absolute crying shame.
Gary, thank you. Dean, your opening remarks.
Well, that was a great start. Thank you, Gary. So, as you know, my name's Dean Baxendale. I'm the publisher at Optimum. Canada Under Siege is the culmination of an 18-month investigation, but was predicated on, prior to that, 5 years of intelligence gathering from another book that we published, The Mosaic Effect, which looked at elite capture throughout the country. And within that, we identified the United Front works operations in Prince Edward Island and British Columbia and numerous other jurisdictions throughout the country. Optimum has published no less than 10 books now, specifically about the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration operations, not only in Canada, United States, but in the UK and around the world. I work with the diaspora communities, elevating their voices, the Tibetans. I was here with a press conference with the Sikyon, the president of the Tibetan government in exile, last week. These are important topics for them, and I'm going to get to the intersection of how Tibetan Buddhism plays out on Prince Edward Island as now a geopolitical issue. But suffices to say, as Gary said, Optimum's been around for some time. My father started this. He was one of the first brave publishers to publish on organized crime in this country. We published over 500 titles during the last 50 years. And we are a publisher that looks for truth to power. But the only way we get to where we are is because of solid people, whistleblowers, people who have a story to tell, and sometimes it is well beneath the surface until it starts to bubble to the top. Our first book, Hidden Hand, really highlighted the global geopolitical interference and influence operations starting in the UK, here in Canada, the elite capture of former MP and ambassador to China, John McCallum. And you know, I spoke to John before we published the book. I gave him the excerpt and said, John, here's what we're publishing. Here's what it says. I said, do you have any comment? And John said, no, Dean, that's fine to go with. So basically, John knew that he was in part working on behalf and forwarding the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, let's look back. The whole world was engaged with China. Going through 1990 through 2000, we were all in on China. We all believed that China was going to reform. China was going to democratize. China was going to liberalize. China would move away from their egregious human rights records. In fact, what we've seen is the exact opposite. And actually, when the wall fell, the Chinese Communist Party continued to double down. Even though their public facing is win-win trade. It's all good, it's all good. And we want China engaged. This is a country that we need to engage, but it can't be on the CCP's terms. And we have to remember about all the people in China that are under the repression of this regime, and all the people in Canada and around the world who I speak to, or who are in the diaspora communities, who are repressed by the Chinese Communist Party here in this country. They target journalists like Sam Cooper, who brought you willful blindness, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with here. And that's why we had a foreign interference commission or inquiry in Canada. That's why we had the Cullen Commission, because we published. We dared to bring the truth forward. People said it was a conspiracy. And I remember having a conversation with somebody in Munich, the Munich Security Conference, former general, NATO. He said, Dean, you know what? It's all conspiracy until it's true. And I think what we've laid bare is that China is engaged in hybrid warfare to such an extent in our country and in all other jurisdictions in the world. They are undermining democracy writ large. That's what Canada Under Siege is about, and how Tibet got engaged with this. But it started with the PNP program. provincial nomination program. And I'm not going to disclose the whole book, obviously, because I'd like you to buy a copy, because at the end of the day, I am a poor publisher, just doing good for the world. But bottom line is, that's where it started, PNP, and there was a lot of corruption. We had whistleblowers there that tried to bring it forward. They lost their jobs. They lost their standing in Prince Edward Island. They had to run away from the island to get jobs. Eventually, it was settled, but almost 10 years later, and they won a lawsuit against the government. But it took, again, media to bring that story forward. The intersections of Tibetan Buddhism, the Chinese Communist Party writ large, is working very, very closely to undermine the Dalai Lama's claim to his own succession, or we'll call that the reincarnation. That's what our press conference was here in Ottawa about with the CKON last week. And they want to control Tibetan Buddhism in Taiwan. Why? Well, that's a soft power tool by getting the Tibetan Buddhists, or Buddhists in general, in Taiwan. When China takes over, they will naturally assume that this is the positive reunification of China writ large. So it speaks to a bigger narrative. The Chinese play, this PRC plays a long, long game. We know from working with people in the intelligence community and our own academics and studying and our investigation that these organizations have been infiltrated both by organized crime in Taiwan, as well as the Chinese Communist Party through the Buddhist Association of China, and are working and engaging in this peaceful reunification process of Taiwan and Tibetan Buddhism on both sides, Taiwan and China. And that's where it intersects back to Prince Edward Island. But Zhen Ru, who is the leader of this organization, came from mainland China, was in another movement, the Qiong movement.
Aaron here at Canadian Looney. So we're going to skip back. That is a pretty crazy story about what's happening in Prince Edward Island and the PRC taking over pretty much everything, every avenue of government, man. They're not coming for Ontario. They're, of course, going to attack Prince Edward Island first, which is a beautiful little island. Anyways, we're getting back into this. Are we? Sorry, gang. Sometimes the computer lags. Oh, we're just screwing this up all over the place. Forgive me, gang. Mostly we try to keep it tighter than this.
So the Act defines divestment to
Nope.
Ontario. Democracy Watch's Duff Conacher says there is more than enough evidence to pursue.
Legacy media, all that propaganda. They've got the radio stations, newspapers. I don't know how a proper Canadian is supposed to keep their head about it. Anyhow, What is going to bring them down? It might be an old scandal. Let's take a look.
God damn it, that's
We'll
not
get
news.
into the
What about
phone
us?
call, like actually the audio from that phone call at the end of this. But in the meantime, we've got this story to tell. Like, I wasn't paying attention back then. I heard about this, but I didn't really follow it. I kind of know what happened now. Let's take a look.
It was back in February 2019 at a parliamentary committee that Jody Wilson-Raybould famously spoke her truth on how Trudeau pressured her when she was Attorney General to withdraw criminal charges against mining company SNC-Lavalin. Fast forward to earlier this year, when Democracy Watch sent a letter to Ontario Attorney General Doug Downey, asking him to pave the way for a private prosecution of Trudeau for obstruction of justice and breach of trust in the SNC-Lavalin affair. But the Ontario Attorney General's office decided to stay the proceedings, stating the unlikelihood of conviction. Yet Democracy Watch's Duff Conacher says there is more than enough evidence to proceed, and has asked the Ontario Attorney General to reconsider in a new letter.
And there's lots of evidence that Justin Trudeau intentionally tried to get the Attorney General, pressured the Attorney General to stop the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. And that's all that's needed to prove obstruction of justice. So if you can't stop a prosecution based on an incorrect legal standard, saying we can't prove this.
The scandal led to Wilson-Raybould resigning from cabinet and eventually being ousted from the Liberal Party. Conacher admits the issue may have long...
I mean, it's just a standby and
Gang, what's up? Aaron here, Canadian Loney. Sorry for the delay in getting started. We'll be rocking it out for the rest of this video. Let's get right into it. Jody Wilson-Raybould is back in the headlines. Trudeau is not going to easily escape this scandal. Let's take a look. Maybe he's going to jail. Maybe they all are. They should. That's a nice thought, right? Let's take a peek.
I mean, it's just a standby and watch the SS Trudeau, sink on its own.
All the legacy media, all that propaganda, they've got the radio stations, newspapers. Like, I don't know how a proper Canadian is supposed to keep their head about it. Anyhow, what is going to bring them down? It might be an old scandal. Let's take a look.
God damn it, that's
we'll
not
get
news.
into the
What about
phone
us?
call, like actually the audio from that phone call at the end of this. But in the meantime, we've got this story to tell. Like, I wasn't paying attention back then. I heard about this, but I didn't really follow it. I kind of know what happened now. Let's take a look.
It was back in February 2019 at a parliamentary committee that Jody Wilson-Raybould famously spoke her truth on how Trudeau pressured her when she was Attorney General to withdraw criminal charges against mining company SNC-Lavalin. Fast forward to earlier this year, when Democracy Watch sent a letter to Ontario Attorney General Doug Downey, asking him to pave the way for a private prosecution of Trudeau for obstruction of justice and breach of trust in the SNC-Lavalin affair. But the Ontario Attorney General's office decided to stay the proceedings, stating the unlikelihood of conviction. Yet Democracy Watch's Duff Conacher says there is more than enough evidence to proceed, and has asked the Ontario Attorney General to reconsider in a new letter.
And there's lots of evidence that Justin Trudeau intentionally tried to get the Attorney General, pressured the Attorney General to stop the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. And that's all that's needed to prove obstruction of justice. So if you can't stop a prosecution based on an incorrect legal standard, saying we can't prove this.
The scandal led to Wilson-Raybould resigning from cabinet and eventually being ousted from the Liberal Party. Conacher admits the issue may have long since faded from the public mind, but that doesn't mean it should be forgotten.
It was deliberately made old news by the RCMP, and it is a cover-up, and they tried to bury it, keep it secret, and just through delay, hope that everyone would stop paying attention and they would be able to, for completely unjustifiable reasons, let Justin Trudeau walk. And we're not going to give up on it.
Wilson-Raybould won re-election as an independent in 2019, but left politics in 2021.
The RCMP had been doing its job and not covering up for him, then he would have been criminally charged. And again, he probably violated the criminal code in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. These would normally have led to criminal charges, but of course the RCMP covered it all up, and the leadership of the RCMP is frankly just despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government.
The podcast, I believe, was taped October 3rd, posted yesterday. He was referencing the RCMP's decision not to pursue criminal charges against Justin Trudeau or other people in the government over their involvement in the SNC scandal. Mr. Poilievre characterized the leadership of the RCMP as, quote, despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government and accused them of covering up for Trudeau. Do you have proof of that?
Well, as I just pointed out, there's direct evidence of an attempt by the Prime Minister, a sitting Liberal Prime Minister, to interfere with the Attorney General's carrying out of her duties. That audio was released. I listened to it on I believe you probably have too. That is what I would point to. That when the RCMP says, "Oh, there's no evidence of interference," it's like, well, sorry, what more do you need?
But I was not surprised. In fact, when Jody was kicked in the teeth by the Prime Minister and shuffled down to Veterans Affairs, as important as it is, that was a clear slap in the face for all Indians across the country.
These serious allegations lodged yesterday by Jody Wilson-Raybould involve a lot of people not outside of just the Prime Minister. In fact, most of them are not household names. Here's a who's who of the key players.
An inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin.
The first name to surface in Wilson-Raybould's testimony, Ben Chin, Chief of Staff to Finance Minister Bill Morneau. He allegedly reached out to Jessica Prince, Jody Wilson-Raybould's Chief of Staff.
He said to her, my chief, that if they don't get a DPA, they will leave Montreal.
Okay, the idea here is to get to the bottom of this scandal. Was Wilson-Raybould being the honest lady, or did the Liberals do what they do and just lie and maul over another Canadian? Because that is what they've been doing, but we'll see.
Montreal, and it's the Quebec election right now, so we can't have that happen.
Wilson-Raybould also says Morneau spoke to her directly and stressed the need to save jobs.
And I told him that engagements from his office to mine on SNC had to stop, that they were inappropriate.
I want to be clear. I never raised this issue with Jody Wilson-Raybould. She approached me in the House of Commons to inform me that my staff was speaking to her staff, which I think is entirely appropriate.
Then there is Mathieu Bouchard and Elder Marcus. Both are senior advisors to the Prime Minister. They allegedly pushed Prince and Wilson-Raybould more than once to seek outside legal opinion on negotiating a DPA.
Mathieu and Elder also raised the idea of a, quote, informal reach out, end quote, to the DPP. My chief of staff said that she knew I was not comfortable with that, as it looked like and probably did constitute political interference.
Then there's the Privy Council clerk, Michael Wernick. Between September and December, Wilson-Raybould had 3 conversations with him, according to her, one involving the Prime Minister as well. In that meeting, they allegedly warn of SNC-Lavalin job losses and that there's an upcoming election in Quebec, and that the Prime Minister is an MP in Quebec.
I was quite taken aback. My response, and I vividly remember this as well, was to ask the Prime Minister a direct question while looking him in the eye. I asked, quote, "Are you politically interfering with my role, my decision as the Attorney General? I would strongly advise against it," end quote. The Prime Minister said, no, no, no.
Anyhow, this is all coming up. We're going to show the entire investigation in committee, right here. That is kind of what we do here at Canadian Looney. We show the entire thing so you can make up your own mind. Let's get into that.
As we resume our meetings on the study of remediation agreements, the shock cost doctrine, and the discussions between the Office of the Attorney General and government colleagues as relates to SNC-Lavalin, I would very much like to thank our witness today, the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould, our colleague from Vancouver-Grenville, who has agreed to come before us today. As opposed to our standard practice of allotting witnesses 10 minutes, we all have agreed to afford Ms. Wilson-Raybould 30 minutes in order to be able to more fully tell her story She is at the center of the events we're studying, and I think it's really important to give her that time. I would, of course, advise other witnesses that that will not be the normal practice of the committee. Before we begin Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony, Mr. Rankin has advised me he has a point that he wishes to raise, and I don't want to eat into Ms. Wilson-Raybould's time. So I'll ask Mr. Rankin to give his point.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's actually two kind of related points. The first is that when she accepted our invitation, Ms. Wilson-Raybould wrote us, and I quote, "I will remain before the committee to answer questions for as long as the committee wishes." Now, you'll recall, Mr. Chair, that when we also extended time for Mr. Wernick, the clerk of the Privy Council office, and he was willing to stay longer as well. So I'd like to move that the committee accept her offer and allow her to spend longer with us either today or at some subsequent meeting. That's my first point. And the second was, since she's going to do a very lengthy statement in terms of how we've proceeded in the past, I'd like to ask if there is a written statement, if it could be distributed while she's speaking, because of course we will have even less time for questioning than usual as a result, and would give us, I think, more efficiency in asking questions if we had that statement before us in advance. Those are my two suggestions.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. As to the first suggestion, I'm wondering if Ms. Wilson-Raybould does indeed have a statement that she would like to be distributed to the committee. Or would she prefer, because I think this is, I would like to go to her preference. What would she prefer?
I do have a statement. It's been provided to the translators, and if it is the will of the committee, they can distribute that to members.
So as soon as then copies are ready, Mr. Clerk, the committee agreed to have that statement in English only? Okay. We need. Mais on va le fournir dès que c'est possible.
We'll provide it as soon as possible, Mr. Fortin. We will provide it to you in French as soon as possible. You don't have it available right now. No, that's why I asked for unanimous consent from the committee to distribute it. And as I'm not a member of the committee, I can't vote. But I'd like to have a copy in English and a French one as soon as possible, as soon as it's ready.
So I think I have unanimous consent, so the clerk can distribute that. And as to the proposal, I very much appreciated Ms. Wilson-Raybould's offer to stay longer for questions. Our standard is 2 rounds. I think there's agreement that we'll go longer than 2 rounds, and then let's take it round by round after round 3. We went for 3 with Mr. Wernick, then let's talk round by round if you have more questions.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So would you like Mr. Rankin to get the statement before Ms. Wilson-Raybould begins, or can we begin?
That would be my preference if it could be made available.
How long will it be?
Well, at least 5-10 minutes.
It'll be 5 or 10 minutes. So I think it's only fair to the witness to let her begin. Ms. Wilson-Raybould, the floor is yours, and when we get to 30 minutes, I'll just give you a sort of sign to let you know that it's there.
House Father is almost a joke. Like, the way he looks, we won't pick on that too much. I'm not that handsome myself, but, like, this Anthony House Feather Father, whatever his name is a clown.
Okay.
Watch.
Thank you so much, Ms.
It's only
Wilson-Raybould.
going to get worse. All knows.
Well, Gaila Kusla, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the Justice Committee for providing me the opportunity for extended testimony today. I very much appreciate it. And starting off, I would like to acknowledge the territory, the ancestral lands of the Algonquin people. For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December of 2018, I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin. These events involved 11 people, excluding myself and my political staff, from the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, and the office of the Minister of Finance. This included in-person conversations, telephone calls, emails, and text messages. There were approximately 10 phone calls and 10 meetings specifically about SNC, and I and/or my staff were a part of these meetings. Within these conversations, there were expressed statements regarding the necessity of interference in the SNC-Lavalin matter, the potential of consequences, and veiled threats if a DPA was not made available to SNC. These conversations culminated in December the 19th of 2018 with a conversation I had with the clerk of the Privy Council, a conversation that I will provide some significant detail on. A few weeks later, on January the 7th, 2019, I was informed by the Prime Minister that I was being shuffled out of the role of Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. For most of these conversations, I made contemporaneous notes, detailed notes, in addition to my clear memory, which I am relying on today, among other documentation. My goal in my testimony is to outline the details of these communications for the committee and indeed all Canadians. However, before doing that, let me make a couple of comments. First, I want to thank Canadians for their patience since the February 7th story, which broke in the Globe and Mail. Thank you as well, specifically to those who have reached out to me across the country. I appreciate the messages and I have read all of them. Secondly, on the role of the Attorney General. The Attorney General exercises prosecutorial discretion as provided for under the Director of Public Prosecutions Act. Generally, this authority is exercised by the Director of Public Prosecutions, but the Attorney General has authority to issue directives to the DPP on specific prosecutions or to take over prosecutions. It is well established that the Attorney General exercises prosecutorial discretion. She or he does so individually and independently. These are not Cabinet decisions. I will say that it is appropriate for Cabinet colleagues to draw to the Attorney General's attention what they see as important policy considerations that are relevant to decisions about how a prosecution will proceed. What is not appropriate is pressing the Attorney General on matters that she or he cannot take into account, such as partisan political considerations, continuing to urge the Attorney General to take her or his mind for months after the decision has been made, or suggesting that a collision with the Prime Minister on these matters should be avoided. With that said, the remainder of my testimony will be a detailed and factual delineation.
Do I look pretty enough to go on camera? Aaron, Kennedy, and Loney, like, share, subscribe. That was a fun evening watching these videos. If you want to see the rest of this one, it's last night's video. You can find it in the links. Aaron, Kennedy, and Loney, like, share, subscribe. Thank you, Kirk. You're the man. Beam me up. Yeah, rough day here. Like, my poor ma back in the hospital. What are you going to do? Like, that situation isn't going to get better. Like, people are going to say, well, I hope she gets better. That's a normal thing to say. It's not going to get much better. One of those conditions. Anyhow, what are you going to do? Aaron, Kennedy, and Loney, everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics. Get your Canadian federal politics